Feinstein.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Director Freeh, I just want to thank you for your service to the FBI and to the country, and you certainly made a very precise and spirited defense of the agency, and I know there are a lot of people that appreciate it. Mrs. White, I want to thank you for your service. I think you run one of the foremost U.S. Attorney's Office, or did run in the country, and thank you for those very successful prosecutions. And Mr. Pilar, I just want to say that your views, for me, are having greatly increased value. The more I listen to you, the more I see the depth of your knowledge. So I thought it might be a nice thing to say that. Ms. White, let me begin with you on FISA, because it's been a kind of ongoing interest for me, and that subject is the wall. And as you know, we're still awaiting an appellate decision from the FISA court. But in the Patriot Act, we changed the standard for FISA from a primary purpose, must be foreign intelligence, and added the word significant purpose. And now the recommendation of the Attorney General is essentially to even break that down further. What are your views? Do you believe that significant purpose is substantial to overcome and break down, as you described, that wall to be?
I would have thought so until the FISA court decision. In fact, as I think I mentioned this morning, I was instrumental in making the recommendations in both directions to get the walls down, and I think there's no question that the primary purpose test, which I guess was engrafted actually by courts prior to the USA Patriot Act to some extent, did retard, I think, seeking FISA applications out of a concern to defend, that record, that indeed if there was a criminal prosecution and you had to defend the FISA wire, that you want to be very careful and very conservative about that. I think too conservative. I think the Justice Department was too conservative in some ways. But there's no question that the primary purpose test was a cause of a lot of that. I would have thought the change to a significant purpose would have been sufficient, but I doubt that now given the decision.
So, well, this is another day, but I would certainly, if you have a recommendation there, we may revisit this subject in the future. I'd
be happy to
very much like
give it to you.
Like to have it. Mr. Freeh, if I might, in reading through Dr. Hoffman's written report here, he's vice president of the RAND Corporation, he points out, and this was interesting, that really not until 1980, as a result of repercussions from the revolution in Iran, do the first modern religious terrorist groups appear. And they amounted that year to 2 of 64 groups that were active during the year. 12 years later, the number of religious terrorist groups had increased nearly 6-fold, representing 1/4 of the terrorist organizations who carried out attacks in 1992. Significantly, he says, this trend has not only continued, but it has accelerated. By 1994, 1/3 of the 49 identifiable terrorist groups could be classified as religious in character and motivation. In 95, their number increased yet again to account for nearly 1/2 of the 56 known terrorist groups active that year. And then he points out the higher levels of lethality of religious terrorism. Now, my question ties in with that, because I think for a law enforcement agency, that even makes the intelligence gathering much more difficult. Agents that I have talked to, when I've had a chance to sort of talk to them informally, have said that most of their work surrounds the opening of a case rather than pure intelligence gathering. If you add to that the religious overtones of this, it seems to me it makes the gathering of intelligence, its dissemination, its collection and dissemination to a variety of sources, even more difficult. And if you lay over that the culture of the FBI, which is primarily law enforcement, how then can you really carry out where we have to go, which surrounds religious fundamentalism, that it's lent itself to very lethal terrorism? How do you collect that from a law enforcement agency, subject to the law and the strictures that an FBI is subject to?
Senator, that's an excellent question. I don't think it's so much a question of the culture of the FBI or the complexity of the task, admittedly, which is the obstacle. I think it's a combination of resources, legal authorities. You've discussed some with Mary Jo White. You know, the FBI for decades was very effective, I think extremely effective, in working counterintelligence matters during the Cold War. And during World War II, when there wasn't a CIA, the FBI was stationed, as you know, all over the world in South America, performing the collection and disruption functions that the agency took over when the National Security Act of 1947 was passed. So I think, although we're a law enforcement agency, we have a very long tradition. You heard Senator Rudman this morning. The collection ability is there, and it shouldn't be displaced to some new entity without the history or transparency when it's necessary that the FBI has in that regard. But your question and Professor Hoffman's point is an excellent one. The complexity here is overwhelming. And I think that's one of the misunderstandings of al-Qaeda, not in this committee, but around the world. You know, al-Qaeda is a facilitator. It's not just an organization. The people who train in the al-Qaeda camps or trained in the al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan, like Rassam, who was not an al-Qaeda member but was trained by them, will tell you that, you know, the class that was reporting that week for training became a cell facilitated by a global al-Qaeda network, but not an al-Qaeda organization per se, which is why when you say that, you know, there's not a focus on the al-Qaeda organization. Well, the al-Qaeda organization is potentially 10 to 25,000 Afghan war veterans who are all over the world. So I think, in response to your question, the complexity here is enormous, but it's not beyond the capacity of resources and focus and legal authority to address. But it certainly can't be addressed with the current resources.
In your written remarks and your verbal remarks, you say the direct evidence obtained strongly indicated that the 96 bombing, this is Khobar, was funded and directed by senior officials of the government of Iran. The Ministry of Intelligence and Security and Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps were shown to be culpable for carrying out the operation. The bombers were trained by Iranians in the Baqa Valley. Unfortunately, the indicted subjects who are not in custody remain fugitives, some of whom are believed to be in Iran. Also read the New Yorker article. Now this places us in a very unique situation with respect to the debate that's currently going on over Iraq. Here is a direct government connection to a terrorist attack that our premier law enforcement agency has discovered. To whom did you relay this information? And what did you ask to do about? I mean, what did you ask them or say to them that you wanted to do to carry out arrests or activities, or what advice did you provide?
Well, first of all of that information as we received it, which was the product of interviews, direct interviews by FBI agents, was immediately reported to the Attorney General, the National Security Advisor. This committee, I think I was a few days after that briefing when I came here, and to the chairman and the vice chairman in very secure fashion, gave them that exact information. With respect to what I asked for or recommended, the only objective that I had, because my instruction was to make that case and work that case and leave no stone unturned, which is what I tried to do, was to identify and indict and then try to have apprehended any and all people who were responsible for that bombing. So that was my objective and that was my recommendation.
And just leave it at that? Take no other stronger actions with respect to Iran?
No, I would not have made that recommendation. That's not the place of the FBI director, nor was that our tasking. Our tasking was to work the case, find the evidence, indict who could be indicted, and find who could be found. And that's what we did.
In the New Yorker article, a conflict was related between you and the administration over the bombing. Did you, in fact, believe that you didn't get the support you needed?
Well, we got an indictment, and we got there after 5 years. We got there by a lot of hard work, by developing relationships, by making requests for assistance, which ultimately were granted. Was it a perfect scenario? Was it one conducted without frustration? No, but I measure the success by the result, which was the indictment that was returned.
The Inspector General, in a recently released audit of the FBI's counterterrorism program, pointed out that the FBI never provided a comprehensive written report on the training, the skill level, the likelihood of attack, or other basic characteristics of the terrorist threat to the United States. Why was that?
Well, my understanding is that there was a draft threat assessment, which was done before September 11th. We also participated in a 5-year study and recommendation, which the Attorney General had organized. The threat assessment apparently was not as specific as the GAO inspectors wanted it, but there was, as I understand it, a draft threat assessment which was completed before September 11th.
Is that available to us? Well, I'm sure it is.
I guess I'm the wrong person to ask, but...
Right, but be interesting to find out.
I think that's noted in the GAO report, actually.
Okay. After DCI Tenet, whom you commend, and of course we do as well, declared war on al-Qaeda in December 1998, at any time after that, did the White House or anyone inform you that al-Qaeda was a Tier 0 target?
No, I mean, not that I recall, but I mean, everybody in the White House and certainly everybody in the FBI by December of 1998 had focused on al-Qaeda as the primary target. That terminology that you use, Senator, I apologize, I don't recognize it.
Of the highest, well,
yeah, it was our #1 priority. I mean, by the time DCI Tenet declared war, Mary Jo White had already indicted bin Laden 2 times. There was no question in anybody's mind working that program that he and al-Qaeda were the #1 priority.
You have some recommendations in your written report. Based on your rather considerable experience with these terrorist bombings, in terms of turning the FBI, not turning it, but encouraging its intelligence gathering and the communication of intelligence, its dissemination to other intelligence agencies, what do you believe is the single most important thing that could be done? Because the comments that we receive is that the FBI doesn't turn over intelligence. We've heard that, at least I have, from the NSA. We've heard it from the CIA. Other than putting detailees, which has been the case, to work in the CTC, which is one way of doing it, how do you break down that? I don't want to use the word culture, but that's the word that's been used to define it. What's the single most important thing that you would recommend be done?
Okay. I think there's a couple things, and I don't subscribe to the characterization culture. It's a generality that to me doesn't have any relevance. But I think you do it in a number of ways. You do it by a top-down decision and implementation of the kinds of sharing initiatives and motivations and opportunities that existed. We brought a succession of senior CIA officers, as you know, over to the FBI. And senior FBI agents went over to run the Counterterrorism Center as a deputy on numerous occasions. The notion there was a simple one, that not only would we have an exchange of officers, but the CIA officers who came to the Bureau had line authority in the counterterrorism unit. That's one way. The other way I recommend in my recommendations, interoperability of databases. We don't have that, not just between the FBI and the CIA, but around the government. It is a hugely expensive but not technically complex solution to most of the problems that we've been talking about and that you've been hearing about in this committee. Gaps and lapses in little facts and bits of information going where they need to go quickly and efficiently. We don't have that. Obviously, resources, statutory authority, the Patriot Act goes a long way in breaking down the wall that you and Ms. White were talking about a moment ago. You know, changing the domestic guidelines and the FCI guidelines, which are now being changed, by which the agents in the field have operated for many, many years with respect to opening investigations, using sensitive techniques, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think there's one single thing, although the interoperability of data,
Right.
Which almost guarantees participation and exchange because of the momentum of that technology, would really be critical.
Encryption, which is something that I was interested in, and I recall that you met in my office with some of the CEOs of the major computer firms on this issue. I was under the impression that agreements had been worked out with respect to the key issue, and that the problem was somewhat solved. Is that the case today, or is it not the case?
No, that is not the case. And I would give you more credit than just participated in the meeting. You set the meeting up with the senior CEOs in the industry and pursue that. We have right now some very important and very successful voluntary arrangements and exchanges with industry which go a long way to solving the problem. The problem, however, is not solved. There is absolutely no legal authority for your law enforcement officers to retrieve with a court order in hand the plain text of a terrorist or someone else in a intercepted communication or in some stored data. They fixed this in the UK. The Parliament passed the statute. We tried here, as you know, many, many years. Chairman Goss, I can't praise you enough for your leadership and your industry. Norm Dix, who's not here. We got absolutely no support any place in the government, quite frankly, either down the street or up here. It is the single greatest vulnerability to our technical capacity to prevent terrorism. And it is unaddressed in the Patriot Act. It is not being addressed anyplace else. It is mind-boggling that with the political atmosphere and the momentum we have to fight this war, that we can't fix this.
My time is up. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.